So hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Wallace, and I am an alumni of the School of Communications and Culture here at Royal Roads University. I first want to acknowledge that Royal Roads University is located on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. With gratitude, we live, work, and learn here, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. I'm very excited to welcome to you today today's conference session entitled Generative AI Classroom Design with Donna Marie Hamilton and Ken Jeffries. This session explores ethical dimensions in integrating new technological advances in higher education, addressing challenges and opportunities for educators, emphasizing the imperative to prepare students as a responsible digital citizen. In the discussions, we will focus on instilling critical thinking and ethical decision-making in the face of evolving generative AI. Donna Marie Hamilton is the instructional designer for the School of Communications and Culture. She works with instructors to create assessments and activities that reflect the high standards of professional communication. Donna Marie has many years of experience as a K-12 and post-secondary educator. Ken Jeffries has many years of experience in post-secondary teaching and instructional design that informs his role as the Associate Director of CTECT at Royal Roads University, researching strategies for implementing social media and constructivist techniques. Teachings practices lead to other research and writing interests in visual learning design. Socially constructive learning, critical pedagogy, and open education practices. Ken also teaches at the university as an associate faculty member at the School of Education and Technology. So today's session will be 45 minutes in length, and we will hope to have time for questions at the end. I will go off camera momentarily, but gather questions in the chat so that I can ask them at the end for you. If you're interested in learning anything else about the MA Professional Communications program or the BA in Professional Communications program, I can put a link in the chat. Now, welcome to today's panel for what I know will be a very interesting, engaging discussion. So turn it over to you, Donna Marie.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, friends. Wow, it's so great to see so many of you here today. Thank you for joining Ken and I for this conversation about generative AI in the classroom. We want to offer to you in this conversation that the use of generative AI, and of course, ChatGPT is on everyone's mind, but it's just one. It's a multi-step journey that includes continuous learning, critical thinking, and digital literacy skills. You know, we lay out for you some of the limitations that you might have, but also some of the opportunities that you might have to use generative AI. We do believe it's a journey because it's certainly a new landscape and, pardon me, a new terrain that we're encountering. And it provides educators with so many opportunities to prepare students to use. And we'll also add or not to use generative AI as a tool in academia. What a great opportunity to model digital literacy skills in academia. Of course, we know that it is shared responsibilities, accountability, and transparency around using generative AI. So next slide and over to you, Ken.
Thanks, TM. I will start just by talking really briefly about our context at the university. Our department is called CTET, the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies. We are a service unit. We support all manners of teaching and learning at the university. We provide both technical support, so the infrastructure and the technologies that we use in order to reach our students, but we also provide educational support in terms of best practice, pedagogy, andragogy. How do we present good teaching and learning practices at the university, that's us. We help to do that. And our instructional designers are key to that. So you heard that DM is our instructional designer that works with the School of Communication and Culture at the university. Our IDs work very closely with the instructors, but I also work with the schools and the staff as well. We provide support and guidance across the university for educational strategies and best practices in teaching. We're also scholars ourselves. We study the ways people learn. We are always trying to keep on top of new things that are changing, and this can be challenging. Learning itself is a difficult thing to observe. We all learn. It's an internal process. So the ways that we help folks learn can be challenging. And as new ideas and technologies come along, and you might be able to see where I'm going with this, particularly with AI, we're constantly needing to find new ways to integrate, adapt to the technology, and sometimes even advise caution when appropriate. So that gives you a little summary of what we do and where we're coming from for today's topic. When we talk, we're going to talk a lot about generative AI. DM and I are going to use that term a lot. We're also going to talk about things like large language models, etc. But the whole encompassing term of generative AI, we are using the expression to describe technologies that can create things, perhaps like text, like ChatGPT. DM mentioned there's lots of other text generators. I'm going to come to a specific term later on what's going on when we generate new text using a large language model. There's image generation, DALL-E, Leonardo, Stable Diffusion. There's lots of technology out there where you can say, oh, I would just want a picture of a parrot, and it makes a picture of a parrot for you. In fact, we've used AI generated images for some, well, perhaps most of our slides in this presentation contain images that were generated by AI. So you can, as we go through our slides, you can try and guess. Well, we do have little attributions in the corner in case you're not sure where the image came from. Lately, video creation is also becoming more popular and more possible to create videos that seem seamless and seem like they have real images and people in them. And then audio generation, of course, voiceovers, narration. All these things also bring the dangers of what's called a deep fake. We just heard about lately, there was a Tom Hanks advertising that Tom Hanks had to come out and say, hey, that wasn't me, and disowned himself from that advertising campaign because it was all completely made up by AI. Which brings us to a question, and that is, how do we teach in a world where literally anything or even anyone could be created artificially? And this is where I hand it back over to you, DM.
Thank you. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, challenges that we're going to face, or we are already facing in academia. And as Ken has said, how do we teach in a world where so many things are created artificially? Next slide, please, Ken. In this journey of learning digital skills, and how do we decide how to place generative AI in the world of academia and in professional communication? Would like to offer that being very, very clear about your expectations are fundamental. Allowing students maybe to role play in, we'd say, formative and low stakes versus high stakes summative assessments are really important. So what might be an example of low stakes? That might include reflection pieces, image generation. As Ken mentioned, you see some of the images that we have generated using generative AI. There are limitations in using generative AI, whether it is for the image generation or for reflection. And Ken will speak a little bit later. We both will speak about the limitations. that you can face, but certainly having low-stake formative assessments allows students the opportunity to learn appropriate prompts for the context. And for example, in professional communications, you're a professional communicator, and there's an example of an E. coli outbreak, and you need to produce a brief that's going out. Can you use a generative AI possibly as a starting point to say what you might be able to put out there? But certainly you would want to make sure that you're asking good questions, and you're going to check with your legal team before you send that out for sure. But that's an example of a formative assessment around where that's something that you could include in your courses to say to students, let's practice around how we can ask ChatGPT good questions. And then you can get feedback from your instructors and peers. So the low stakes, the iteration process is extremely important because it provides opportunity for scaffolding and zone of proximal development. And certainly if both instructors and students identify that you're not getting a grasp of the tool, then it might not be appropriate for the context. Then don't use it. It's a journey of iteration. Next slide, please, Ken. Yeah, we believe that transparency is really, really important in this journey. Being very clear about, yes, you can use it for this particular assignment, this particular activity, but not for the other ones. So an ongoing conversation. It is important that instructors position yourself in a continuous learning mode by practicing the technology, keeping abreast with the affordances and the changes. Even with the image generation, you probably see that the images are different depending on the generative AI that we use. And certainly the way the images are generated, the types of images that are generated will certainly change as the affordances of the technology change. It is imperative that instructors model how to use generative AI. We don't believe that in this journey that you can just simply put it into your course without saying to students, here are the ways that you can use it, and having that, as I mentioned before, that conversation and giving students, we call it sandboxing, providing that sandbox, allowing students to iterate and to get that feedback. And as instructors, professional communicators, being the guide on the side for the students, okay? And keeping abreast with the changes. Over to you, Ken. Next slide, please.
Thanks, DM. One of the things that you might pick up as DM's talking there is that we really want to help everyone, all of our students in particular, understand what's going on with this technology. And a fun and interesting phrase that was coined by Dr. Emily Bender out of the University of Washington is that it's a stochastic parrot. This phrase sums up, for me anyways, and hopefully it's helpful for some of you, that it is really a system for haphazardly stitching together sequences of linguistic forms. Dr. Bender is a recognized academic linguist in linguistics. And this phrase is meant to convey the lack of intelligence at play in generative AI. And we call it AI, but it's not really intelligent. In fact, my daughter has a pet parrot, and it's much smarter than ChatGPT, I would propose. It's a word generator, and it's a fancy word generator. It's one that selects the very best words to put together given the context, but it's almost like that old expression, what happens if you have an infinite number of typewriters. So it's parroting back words from a huge data set of millions and millions of documents. So it's not really intelligent, and it's also not authentic. So that leads us in education to say, yes, as DM was saying, let's see what we can do to iterate and work with it. But we also have some precautions. It is a big mystery box. It invents facts. And even in the word invent implies some agency, and there's no agency involved. It simply puts things together, and some of it is not factual. It only is parroting what has been trained on. And for the most part, these large language models have been trained on the Western academic canon. It's pulling language and predictions based on the English language model that it was built upon. So because of this, can we use it? Perhaps, yes, we can. But questioning, critical thinking, digital skills are foundational to be able to implement this technology into our lives. The ability to discern the output is actually something that needs to be learned. We're all trying to learn it as we go along, and we have to help support our students to learn it as well. As teaching and learning experts, our instructional designers, we've seen technologies come and go, and like all the technologies in the past, we need to prepare our students for a future that may include or is likely to include AI. It doesn't mean that every class actually teaches the AI itself, but like many technologies, it still will be a collateral or indirect learning. For example, we don't teach students how to use Microsoft Word, but we still expect them to use it. So we're looking at AI in a similar way. We need to deal with academic policies. How do we deal with citations required by academic policies? How do we, in most of our courses at Royal Roads, use the APA standard. APA does have a way that you can cite a generative model, but it's a mystery box. There's no way to trace back to the original content. You can't say to ChatGPT, where did you get that information? It doesn't know. And I will end my little slide here with recounting, some of you may have heard, there was a recent legal victory won by a air traveler that was told incorrect information by the Air Canada chatbot. And the courts ruled that the airline had to honor what their AI chatbot had told that customer, even though it was incorrect. So we've got these generators generating information, and the courts are starting to recognize that this is important. If it's important information, there could be some concerns there. Back to you, DM, for ethical concerns,
Yeah, for
considerations.
sure. Yeah. And certainly that example does raise ethical considerations that we need to bear in mind. On everyone's mind is the idea of academic integrity. And we'd like to offer, that what we really need to be careful about the presumption of guilt. It is be careful to not inflict unintended harm to students, right? It is unethical to accuse someone of something they didn't do. None of us like that, right? But already that we're seeing, Ken and I, is that people are standing on a model of what seems to be absolute certainty in our ability to detect if a student has used and so no presumption of guilt. I know that's hard to do, but being very careful about unfounded accusations after an assignment has been submitted, or prejudging and putting in frameworks that might become burdensome and onerous for both students and the instructors. Because if we're going to put in frameworks that says, we know that you're guilty and you have to show us how you're not guilty, then you're really just adding difficulty and a burden, both as an instructor and for the students as well. And that's different from saying, show your work, as a part of an authentic experiential learning via scaffolding and chunking. Next slide, please. And then over to you, Ken.
Thanks, DM. So as you're likely guessing, we tend to face these challenges in teaching and learning, and there's some big ones. A big part of this that I'm going to bring us back to again is that the data itself is baked in, and there's bias in the data that was used to train these models. A recent paper, and I just love the title of this paper, and I'll share it. I've got some references at the end of my slides. I'm happy to share this link. Robots enact malignant stereotypes. Hunt and al. did some research. They programmed some robots and asked the robots to do some sorting exercises. And they used large language models to train these robots and had some terrible results with sexism, racism, and other forms of harmful bias that were coming out of that data set. Images. When we created images, even for these slides, we had to be careful to find or to choose and to develop prompts that gave us good images, because they're coming from a data set that is not necessarily representative or diverse. There are tropes, there are stereotypes, and as much as these companies try to fix it, it's baked in. That technology has been heavily trained on the Western canon. Generative models are mimicking the world based on all that data that they were fed and trained with. And in there is an assumption of what constitutes the norm. And the training data, it scooped it all up. So we need an awareness of what's going on inside the model, and we need to help our students work through that. Another thing that's important to us in education is that in order to use many of these trained generative AI models, people have to sign or agree to an end user license agreement. And in doing so, we're basically agreeing to whatever it says. People scroll down and they click, I agree, and then you're in. In education, we have to be careful with that. Due to privacy and personal information concerns, we have legislation in this province that determines what we can and cannot require students to use. And we cannot tell students, you must use AI in order to complete this project or in order to pass this course. So we always create options that are available to students if they're not willing to opt in to using some of these technological products. Back to you, DM.
Okay, so with all of that caution, you might be wondering, then how can you use generative AI? I mentioned, sandboxing and allowing students to possibly do reflection pieces. And we're aware that for every suggestion that we make, that there is a counter argument as to, even in a reflection piece, students can literally put their homework into generative AI and have the generative AI produce something. So we're probably moving from, to say, it's no longer, my parents or my siblings who did my homework to generative AI, but sandboxing, primer for outgoing communication piece, that iterative process is really so important. And again, I've mentioned before, low stakes so that students can get that continuous feedback. We've had people who've used it for multiple choice questions. And again, knowing that is coming from a Western canon, even for multiple choice questions, being aware that it's pulling from a certain data set, it is not unbiased. Even for image generation, as Ken mentioned, it's very difficult to find diverse images that are representative of everything that you'd want. I know that Ken uses it for Excel formula for grades and for coding. Next slide, please, Ken. Then the question is, so I know we've talked a lot about instructors, but then how can students use it? And you'll find that there's an overlap in how students can use it. Because if you're putting it in as a low stakes assessment, not that you cannot use it for summative assessments, but certainly you'd have had to scaffold students and build them up to that biggest assessment that's worth 15 or more percentage of their grade. So then if you scaffold the students, then they'll know how to use it. Students can explore. They can use it in an assessment where the instructor has clearly indicated how it can be used, getting that priming, the rough ideation, and pointing the way in the journey, maybe to help locate sources of academic information. It's not Google Scholar, right? So students, if you ask ChatGPT for references, it may not be able to do so in specific ways. So for example, and I give an example, I like to ask for references, and I ask ChatGPT for references. So something I ask, and he says, well, I can't provide direct references. And I'll read you exactly what it said. It says, I can't provide direct references as my references are generated based on a mixture of licensed data and data created by human trainers and publicly available data. It continued to say, I can suggest key areas where you can find relevant information and scholarly articles. So again, it's not Google Scholar. So don't expect a specific reference. If you ask where's the CN Tower and where did you get that information, then you'll get a more precise answer. Everything else is, Wild West, as we say. It's just one tool in the academic toolbox, and Ken mentioned the EULA, right? So you are using what you have signed up for. And as students, being aware of the academic criteria will be absolutely necessary. So we're watching our time, and we've presented for you some of the ways that you can use generative AI. It does seem a little bit limited, but at the same time exciting. So keeping your eye out on the affordances, that are coming up for the generative AI. We've talked a little bit about the ethical consideration, and we've cautioned about not just standing on the place of absolute certainty that, oh, we can tell, we can detect when someone has used generative AI. We've seen where in different circumstances people have said, oh, I have seen so many products of ChatGPT that we're absolutely certain we know that this particular product has been created by ChatGPT, and it wasn't correct. So just being wary of that, absolute certainty. But it is exciting times, and we're so glad that you've joined us for the conversation. And we do have a couple of questions for you, and we welcome your questions as well. So I'm going to hand that over to Ken.
Thanks, DM. I put a few questions up on our slide. We're going to move into question and answer period now. We're happy to continue the discussion. You might have questions, you might have concerns or challenges, you might even just have comments. So it doesn't just have to be questions for DM and I. We've got a lot of experts in the room. We have shared our perspective in terms of us as educators, but if you've got something to share, I noticed there were some great things coming up in the chat for resources. Someone mentioned Perplexity, for example. I'd love to just open the floor and invite that kind of a discussion to happen. So you can use the questions that I've got up on the slides, or please generate your own. We'd love to just have a chat about this for the next 15 minutes, and that would wrap up our session.
I can ask some of the questions that are in the chat. Megan asks, I participated in the presentation, last year's presentation, and on AI and possible implications on professional communications, students and instructors. I'm very much a believer that humans are the best people for communications work, and still believe that AI should be approached with caution. That said, I liken it to calculators and mathematics. I imagine mathematics professors at the time felt threatened by calculators for their future work. for the answers on tests and how students learn. And while I learned long division in school, I certainly don't remember how to use it now. What similarities and differences do you see with AI and calculators?
That's fantastic. I don't know if we have all the answers yet. And certainly, so I have a couple thoughts that I can share, and then DM, I'll invite you to join in as well. You know what the other thing that reminds me of is calculators and mathematics. I also in my past, worked in the graphic design industry when Apple invented the Macintosh computer. And for some of these things, we look at it and say, well, that's not a thing we do. We want humans to do it. And I absolutely agree. The best written work is still developed by humans. Where we implement it or how we start using this as our new calculator, that's an interesting question. We do, as some of the ideas DM presented are in more along the lines of ideation, using it as a muse, asking it some questions, poking around the edges with AI. You can play with it and it churns out a bunch of text and it might give you some inspiration, but then I'm hopeful that we see that as an opportunity to then take our human brains and go, okay, now here's how I'm actually going to write this out, and I'm going to do some real research to back it up. The other thing is, and this is why in CTET we have instructional designers like DM that work directly with the schools. So DM, you might want to speak to this. Our faculty are our experts. The teacher, our instructors are the experts that we help. So DM, maybe, I don't know if you've got any thoughts to that.
Similarities between the AI and the calculator as well, for sure. One is I am still trying to manage my high school scientific calculator. So it is, there's different different calculators, there are the basic ones and there are the more complex ones. In either cases, they're both technology and they both need a guide on the side. They both need someone to help students to learn how to use the affordances of both. They both need iterative processes. We can use our peers to help us to learn how to use the calculator and the generative AI. Certainly, in this presentation, we leaned as well on our colleagues in CTET to help us with the generative AI and some of the image generation. So I think the similarities might be that they're both technology. You need the guide on the side, you need the iterative process, you need that clear delineation for students is this is how you can use it, and here's how you can go ahead and explore using that technology.
Okay, we have
like Ken says, we don't have all the answers, but starting place.
Sorry about that. There's another question from Catherine Ruddle. The process of seeking, reading, processing, and citing sources seem like such a full circle exercise essential for identifying interconnections or patterns based on our own unique lens and experience that others may not have made yet. Is time and ease the motivation for students to reach for AI? What are the upstream actions to take or solve or mitigate for this?
Time and ease might be certainly a motivational factor. I'm not sure if ease, sorry, Ken, I jumped right in there.
Please go, yeah.
I'm not sure if ease is necessarily a motivation, because if students jump in, they might be jumping into a swamp, not knowing what animals are lurking. So it is not an easy technology to use. Like I said earlier, if you're asking where's the CN Tower, sure, then it might be able to just tell you that. But in terms of how complex assignments are in academia and how complex they should be, it really would be a foolish way of thinking that it is an easy technology to jump in, which is why we say scaffolding, providing the opportunity for sandboxing. I'm trying to find the question itself in the chat to see. because I like to read the question. I'm not identifying it. Hopefully I'm answering, but I think I gathered it was a question about ease and time. Ken, do you want to take a shot at that question as well while I try to locate it?
One of the things that one of the things I was thinking of mentioning in this session, but we didn't get to it, was almost the same way we would do, and I think you talked about the cyclical nature of, following research, which leads to more articles, which then expands your thinking and allows the person, the human side of us, to then start generating ideas for what our research could become. It's almost that citation mining, where we're following the breadcrumbs. Whether AI can help us with that, it's difficult, because we also know that AI has been known to make up citations out of the blue that don't even exist. So yeah, and it is. I saw someone else did something about swamp. the swamp. I think it's challenging, and perhaps we don't have the answer to it. We certainly, as DM said, I would support what DM is saying. We don't want students to think that it's just going to be an easy way out. There are ways for us to help support students learn, and it could include this technology, but it's not about trying to find an easy way to just do a literature review, which is a very specific and complex process, as an example. I don't know. I'm not sure if we even answered your question, or even if we can, but I think that's certainly what I would think about it too.
We have another question here from Miriam. Communications professionals also have to be careful about using AI when working on client projects, which they have signed an NDA. Confidentiality is a serious issue, just thinking of investors' relations work. So you always have to strip copy that you feed into AI tools so that it doesn't include anything confidential or sensitive. I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but could you maybe
Yeah,
comment on that?
yeah, that's a great one. And I think in one of my examples about communication briefs, that whoever is preparing that also have to check with their legal team or whatever legal framework is set up in that particular organization before anything is sent out. But absolutely, and that's how students or the users of generative AI, that is digital literacy skills, knowing that you have to strip that copy before you just feed everything into the AI, and then it grabs that and that becomes a part of its data set. And then you're finding that we're going to have legal problems later on in the course, which we're going to have either way. And of course, the law is way behind technology, often really, really far behind technology. So there are things in the courts that are just like many, many years old and just being, I would say, sorted out. That's not the proper legal terminology, but the courts are just beginning to address. But for sure, Miriam, stripping that copy, participants knowing that being good digital citizens mean that you really have to have that know-how to know that you don't just dump everything into the AI. You have to know what to separate, right, in order to get the primer, but to maintain confidentiality.
And do you have anything to add to that, or no? Okay, we have
No,
we have a
that's
question from Michelle. Do you have any examples of pathways in which the instructors can scaffold work or incorporate low stake assessments, and how do we track that progress in a low energy kind of way as instructors?
I can
I'll allow
share.
Ken to take that one.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm teaching a course right now, actually, and it is a course about using visual design in educational. So there's some of this is applicable, particularly the image generation possibilities. But I've had to be clear. In other words, my assignment prompts. I've had to not only be clear as It's like that calculator example. You may use the calculator on this assignment. You may not use your calculator on this assignment. You can use AI or you cannot. So for example, there's an assignment that I give my students that is meant to be a reflection essay. Now, I mean, I said you may not use AI for this because if you're doing a personal reflection, AI is not going to help. It's got to be something that comes from you as the person. But then I've got other assignments where students are meant to be using images and or graphics to portray thoughts and ideas. And then I've given them some guidance on how they might be able to do that in an effective way. So yeah, it is. So, and of course, each of the assignments starts to build on each other. So at the beginning of the course, it's like, please don't use AI for this. And then as they move through the assignments, we start allowing them to experiment and use some AI if they want to start supplementing what they're building. The goal, even by the end of the course, though, is naturally that the product that they have created is theirs and that they can be proud of it. And it's something that they created themselves. They only used AI for bits and pieces along the way as part of their iterative process. So that perhaps is an example that speaks to that.
I'll just quickly add, because I'm mindful of the time, and it's a plug for CTET and the work that we do, that if you are looking to include generative AI in parts of your activities and your assignment, please have that conversation with us, because we're here to help you to figure it out and to have that conversation with you about the most appropriate way that students can use it in academia. And Ken has given an example, but for ideas that you might have, we're inviting you to come and chat with us so that we can flesh it out with you. I see Beth offered an example for public relations students and that it was compulsory. I like the point, Beth, about the students not always reading the app's instruction thoroughly or being precise with the prompt or critical questioning. And no one should read that 20-page EULA, of course. And we assume that when the EULA, the end user license agreement, is created, that it takes good practices in mind. But you've signed for it, so you're using it, and you have to be aware of that you can't come back and say, this is not what I bought or it's not what I paid for, because you've signed for it. But again, in setting out the assessment, it is about giving students the opportunity to know what's good prompt, getting that feedback, learning to read instructions thoroughly. So yes, if you have to pull out that EULA and say, hey, let's look at that EULA, let's look at parts of it and see what you're signing up for.
Thank you. We are at our 15-minute warning, but I can ask a few more questions. One is from Kay Weber, and they say, my concern is for the artists having their work used without permission or payment. Where is the line between copying and infringing on creative rights?
That is of great concern. And I was thinking about that myself as I was creating some of these images. I used Leonardo.ai and I used Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft Copilot, I don't even know if it does it itself. It's kind of sends you to other image generators and then magically an image shows up. So what is to say perhaps that picture of an owl, I had an anthropomorphic group of owls that are students in a classroom. The training data for that came from other images. What is the dividing line between, have I just inadvertently used artwork that seems similar to other artists? For a lot of the images I've selected and used here, I have used a style that makes it look like 3D animation artwork. The different engines purport to generate as original images as possible. But of course, what those companies tell us they're doing and what's really going on behind the scenes, because of that mystery box thing, I'm always a little cautious. challenges. And as someone who has worked in graphic design myself, now anybody, we used to, if I had to purchase an image like that in the past, I would actually be paying an actual human to create an image. Or if it wasn't worth it, then I just wouldn't, and I would have to use some stock photography, that sort of thing. So that is a whole other area, which I think is going to be very interesting to see where we go pardon me, interesting to see where it ends up. Because I think that folks that are artists are under a lot of pressure right now to find ways to help us continue to want the human element in what we're using. That's a bit of a non-answer. I totally admit that's a bit of a non-answer, because that mystery box idea that these images just pop up and we're not sure where they came from can be problematic. I don't know, DM, if you have anything to add to that one. Or
No, I'm just trying to look through the chat and just bear our time in mind as well. There's some great questions and
yeah.
We're going over, aren't we now? But
we have about 13 minutes.
Oh, do we have 13 minutes? Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
To answer questions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, because the next session doesn't start until 11.
Oh, I thought there was a break. Oh, no, Tanya says it's time to wrap up.
Oh, we are done. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, but I wanted to speak. I'll try to save the questions so that and we can provide Chase with some answers so people can touch base with Chase for some of the answers that we might be proposing. I just see that Beth asked if we have a favorite source of basic training, YouTube video websites, because there's not much time in courses to cover the basics. That is absolutely true. And we can come back to that. In covering the basics, one of the ways that we're saying to cover the basics is to put those low stakes assignments in so that you're crowdsourcing from peers and participants. So if you put a low stakes assignment in, something 5%, maybe lower, then students get to learn how to use it. And then you can include YouTube and other websites. And we can come back to that. We provide some to Chase, and then you get peers saying to each other, oh, here's a better prompt, here are better questions, here are resources that you can use. But we are just so grateful that you showed up today. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. We don't have all the answers, but what an exciting time it is to learn. And really, it's about positioning ourselves as continuous learners, being willing to learn. And I see we're probably out of time, and I'll try to save the chat. Kendi, do you want to add?
Thanks.
And thank you, Lisa, for being our moderator as well. Yeah.
Have great thanks. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. I know there's things in the chat we didn't get to, but it is, and it guaranteed, this is an ongoing conversation that will be going on at our university for quite some time, and I'm sure where you are or in your workplaces, it will continue to be a point of concern and also excitement for many of us. So thank you very much, everyone, for having to listen to what we had to say today.
Well, thank you, DM, and thank you, Ken, very, very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. And thank you, everybody, for attending and posing your questions. They were very interesting to see the different types of impact that the presentation had on everyone.